Welcome all to this episode of Trout Pod, the official podcast of the Western New York chapter of Trout Unlimited. I'm Jim Jowsey. This episode, we check in with what I guess you could call the next generation of directors. Pretty sure he's currently the youngest member on the chapter's board and one of the most passionate, Chuck Sherry. If you were out at the Niagara Outdoor Show, or more recently the Hamburg Show at the fairgrounds, and picked up some flies from us, there's a pretty good chance that Chuck tied them. Chuck's also a really fishy guy, and we're going to talk about not only where he comes from and some of his history, but also a lot of the hatches that you'll find on the waters here in Western New York, as well as Chuck's top 10 list of favorite flies. And as usual, I'll be sitting here slack-jawed, absorbing it all in like a sponge, reveling in the fact that, to my knowledge, I'm the only person on this side of the state that has a bumper sticker on their truck that says I suck at fly fishing. We'll get to Chuck in a little bit, but I want to introduce a new segment on the podcast where we share a little chapter news with you and upcoming events. First off, by the time you're hearing this, we would have already had our March social and speaker series, which is traditionally always election night for our officers and board of directors. Lots of additions and changes this year, so we'd like to give a shout out and congratulations to Board Vice President Ken Kanicki, who is now the chapter president. Board member Chuck Sherry, who will be talking to you later, is our new vice president. Dave Yanetich remains our secretary, and Tony Messina continues on as our treasurer. Welcome to the board, Adam Slavinsky and Jenny Whirling, who bring a ton of knowledge and passion, and grateful thanks to Dr. Jim Budney and Don Kwiatkowski, who after many years of service have decided to step down from the board. Also, huge thank yous to outgoing chapter president Joe Morgan, who's continuing on with the board in the director-at-large position, as well as continuing on as conservation chair. The Stream Explorer schedule for the year is up, and for the fourth year in a row, we'll be out on the waters with what hopefully are the next generation of fly anglers, and quite honestly, anyone who wants to learn. On Saturday, April 18th, we'll be down at 18 Mile Creek in Lakeview at the Lakeshore Road access point to do some fishing and a casting clinic at 10 a.m. We're going back into the city in June on Saturday, June 6th at Hoyt Lake at Delaware Park to do a little urban still water fly fishing. Last year, we had a great event, and we're doing it again. We will be there at 10 a.m. Saturday, August 15th at 10 a.m., are you sensing a pattern here? We'll be out at Sprague Brook Park in Glenwood at the pond behind the Veterans Memorial. And Saturday, September 6th, we're fishing the Wiskoy at Camp Sam Wood in Portageville. All these events are free to take part in. We have some gear for you to use, or feel free to bring your own. We do ask that folks RSVP, and you can do that by visiting the events calendar at WNYTroutUnlimited.org. We're also pretty stoked to be sending a couple of young anglers to both the state trout camp downstate and a national TU trout camp in Wyoming this summer. More information about that, as it gets closer. Well, on the Ishua Creek front, the DEC announced their plans for trout stocking and future habitat enhancements on those sections of Ishua Creek. That press release in its entirety appears on our website. Speaking of the website, sign up for our email newsletter on the website. We send out info once or twice a month, and like someone who brings us their favorite fishing spot, we ain't sharing that info with nobody. And that's the news for now. Recently, new Vice President Chuck Sherry and I connected via our respective man caves and had some fun talking about local hatches and 10 of his favorite patterns. Well, the conversation went something like this. Before we started recording, you got a drum set behind you. You're a musician, and you're a fly angler, and you're a pretty talented fly tyer. And, there's a lot going on, and you're a young man. So, tell me a little bit about Chuck Sherry.
Yeah. Grew up in Hamburg. So I used to ride my bike down to, 18 Mile, and my grandfather was predominantly a walleye fisherman. He used to take me out on the lake, out on his boat all summer long. We'd go catch walleye. He used to take me to all the trout streams. He used to take me to the Wiskoy and East Koy, and mostly bobber fishing. or occasionally in the spring, he'd teach me how to throw little yellow rooster tails. And so, I kind of grew up doing the fishing thing with Grandpa, and he was like my fishing mentor. And I remember when he took me to the Wiskoy and I was throwing my rooster tail, and all these fish were rising and eating bugs and completely ignoring my rooster tail. Couldn't buy a fish. And I said, "Hey, Grandpa, I kind of want to learn how to fly fish." And he said, "Well, good luck. I don't know anything about it. I have a book, I think, about fly fishing that you can have." And that was it for me, though. I all of a sudden I was obsessed with like that challenge of, this is something with fishing that I've never tried. So, yeah, that's kind of my fishing background, was Grandpa getting me out there, and then me just finding fly fishing through being on the water.
Nice. What brought you into the orbit of TU?
Well, Grandpa too. So Grandpa used to pay for my TU membership when I was a kid. He used to bring me to all the little TU events when I was a kid, probably up until I was about like 13 or 14. And then he hit me with the classic, "Well, Charles, if you want to go, then you've got to tell me you want to go." Well, I was 13 or 14. I didn't want to go. I had a lot of other stuff, right? I was a
Yeah.
kid. I started getting interested in all kinds of other stuff, music, all kinds of other stuff. I had everything else that I wanted to do besides go fishing, right? So once Grandpa passed away, and being on the water, thinking about, I didn't have that special person that I could tell all my fishing adventures to anymore. That made me want to get more involved with TU again, because I felt that it was a way for me to connect with other people like me that have had special moments on our trout streams and on our water and out on the lake. And also Orvis, the Orvis store, at the time, being the home of TU, made it easy because I had made some friends up there. So it all just kind of happened for the right reasons when it did.
Awesome. And you've definitely made took advantage of the opportunity. So,
Yeah, it's been great. It's been great because we've got a really special group of people that, you know, care about Western New York. So it's been great to be a part of that and become more of a part of it. And people who are major, avid, diehard fly anglers, and then people who just care about the outdoors, and want to do what they can to, raise awareness for Western New York. It's been great to get back into. So
cool. Well, the reason I wanted to sit down with you, I mean, if for no other reason than, we're just fun to talk to. But,
for sure.
A while back you did a presentation on the hatches of Western New York. We hear about, all the different types of, aquatic insects and, what time of the year they come on. But, we don't necessarily see all of them, but there are certain amounts, that we do see. But I kind of wanted to go through that a little bit. Maybe talk about some flies on on these waters. A lot of the fly fishing media that you see, it's Montana, it's out west. We don't really get a ton of stuff, a ton of information about these waters, and that's one thing I really want to do on this, on this podcast, is concentrate on what we have here and, the things that are, that we have to worry about. So
Yeah, that's great. That's great. I love that stuff. I mean, I would say we're really lucky in terms of you talking about, a lot of the fly fishing media being um, out west, and fancy destination stuff, right? I mean, that stuff's really cool, but we can't all get out and do that. And actually, a lot of times it's nice to have a connection to our home waters, because that's what brings us to places like TU. That's what makes you really care about where you live, is you start to adventure out and you start to realize how close to home there is really great stuff. And Western New York pretty much has every Eastern hatch that you're going to find in like a hatch book, right? Um, and it's just a matter of, do you want to find the bugs? Do you want to find the fish? Do you want to find both? And you can get carried away. I know that when I started to get kind of nerdy with the bug stuff, I almost started hunting bugs rather than fish. And I was finding myself in places where I found the bugs, but you know, if you want to catch fish, you can go down a rabbit hole with the bug stuff, right? So um, I don't know. It's really great that we have the fisheries that we do. I would say that our streams, our trout streams specifically, we have a lot of freestone streams in Western New York that have spring influence, and I think that's important, to lay the groundwork for talking about our hatches, because our freestone streams that have the spring influence, the cool part about them is that like all that spring influence, whether it's from little tributaries or just underground water, that puts the cool water and it increases the pH levels, and that's what gives our streams, the bug life. That's what gives our streams the character that they have, and a lot of them are like rural kind of lowland streams, right? Um, so we battle things in Western New York. There's no doubt about that. Like we're always battling stream pollution. We're always battling growing agriculture, and those things affect our nutrients in our water and the health of our water. But the bugs are the indicator for that stuff. So when you circle back around to the fact that our special home water, I would consider with the Wiskoy our home water of our chapter, all the work that people have done on it from our chapter, all the way back to the 60s, 70s. That's a great example of a freestone stream, but it does run through, it does run through rural, kind of like a lower gradient. So it's a good example of, we do have spring influence on that creek, and so you get certain bugs in certain sections, and that's kind of important. I just figured that's something that people should realize, is you've got certain sections of our streams that have different characteristics, and you're going to find different bugs in different sections. Um, or you can just be practical and just be prepared for anything. And it's mostly being there and finding out what's there. You got to be prepared, and you got to be there to find out, right? So instead of being nerdy and trying to find all these bugs, a lot of times it's a more practical approach to just go out and learn them. And that's what I've done over the years, is certain sections I go and fish during certain times of year, and you get that cool surprise. Oh my gosh, there's a hatch. What the heck is this? And then that goes into your memory bank. But all our streams have their own characteristics. So you're going to find some hatches in some places, and you're not going to find them in others, because of everything is related to that quality of that water.
Yeah, that was something that I found really interesting. We've had Kyle Glenn from National out with the kids a couple of times, for the stream explorers in the summer, and doing a macroinvertebrate study. We did it on 18 Mile Creek, and just I was blown away by, okay, you put a net in the water, and depending upon what you pull out of the water, what kind of bugs, whether it's it's, I mean, that's a really good indicator of the health of a stream. I thought that was a moment for me. So I thought I thought that was really cool.
Having Kyle to be able to do things like that with our chapter is really great. And having someone that actually knows the entomology, and that actually, we're fortunate to have someone like him and others. But it's really cool. You want to talk about a bug nerd? Kyle knows his stuff, and it's really cool that he's a Western New York guy, and he's the guy to talk to about the really nerdy bug stuff. But it is cool, and it's all, again, hatch related. It's all temperature related, just like everything in nature. When plants start to bloom, it's all temperature related. Nature is that way. You need certain conditions for certain things to happen in nature. So birds showing up, birds taking off, leaving, for the winter, like all that stuff is temperature related. Specifically with bugs, aquatic insects, It's flow related too. So, but we have a lot of those streams that are spring influenced. So we get the constant. Um, every year our hatches kind of change in terms of timeline. So I don't know if you want me to like just go through like a briefing.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's what I was going to kind of lead into here is, what does, on the streams, what does your average, spring, summer, fall, what's it look like? I mean, what should somebody, be looking for?
Yeah, cool. As far as I'm gonna talk about the hatches in like, angler terms, right? Angler names, fly names, because there's too much there. There's, the genus and the species and all that. So keeping it pretty average across the board. Caddis are complicated, so I'll start with caddis. You know, early May all the way into late October, you could see a whole bunch of caddis. And the best way for me to talk about their hatches specifically in Western New York is that we have a lot of them, and they're all different sizes and different colors. And when we get into, some of my favorite fly patterns, you'll kind of notice that I stock my box in terms of caddis to just be prepared for kind of anything. I think if I talk about what we're going to see in Western New York as far as hatches, caddis are tricky because again, it's very specific to the water that you're on. It can change even from year to year. Some years with caddis, you'll see specific ones on a stretch of stream, and then the next you won't see them, and it'll be kind of confusing. So, caddis, just be prepared for caddis really any time of the year, all the way from like that late October is when they start to kind of go away for the winter, but early May is when from then till October you're going to see caddis, and they're the tricky hatch because they're the ones that just kind of flutter around. So you got to pay attention to if they're actually hatching or if they're just kind of flying around, right? Are they actually coming off the water, or are they just in your area that you're fishing and they just happen to be fluttering around, or maybe heading upstream? A mating flight of caddis, things like that can kind of throw anglers off. But early season, I'm getting excited right now because we're halfway through March. I'm getting excited for the midges and the blue-wing olives. Really early season, that's what I predominantly see. So early spring, you're going to always see midges and blue-wing olives. Again, there's so many blue-wing olives, right? Batis vegan and all these different ones. So without getting too deep into that stuff, early spring we see small blue-wing olives. We see midges. We also see them at the end of the season, again in the fall. So all the little stuff, it kind of starts there. And then you get into the exciting ones. You get into, end of April, early May, you get into the blue quills. You get into the Hendricksons. So that's an exciting time to be on the water in Western New York, because have you ever had that moment where you go out and it's been a long winter and you see like the first trout eat a mayfly or eat something off the top of the water? It's just
Yeah.
such an exciting feeling. That's cool. So that's usually the blue-wing olives, the blue quills, the Hendricksons. So all of that stuff kind of gets you excited for the mayfly season. And then again, depending on the water that you're on, I think it's pretty fair again to name the Wiskoi specifically because we all know about that very special home water of ours. Once you get past the early season stuff and you get more into like mid-May, early June, you start to see some exciting big mayflies. The Hendrickson starts that. Hendricksons are size 12, size 14, and they're a fairly large mayfly. But then you start to get these like weird bugs that are around the same size, 12s, 14s, but you get the March Browns and you get the gray fox, and we're really lucky that some of our streams have those hatches. I will say they're not very heavy, but they're enough to, the fish see them, right? And again, we're talking inland trout. So they do see them. So that's when you have that opportunity to kind of get there midday. A lot of these mayflies, I guess I should say, a lot of these mayflies are coming off, again, depending on the air temperature, the water temperature. A lot of them are coming off like mid-afternoon and through into the evening. Not a lot of those early spring hatches are like real early morning things. So I think there's like a term in the fly fishing world they call the Hendrickson, like the gentleman's hatch, because you wake up, you don't have to rush, you have your coffee, you have lunch, then you go out, you fish the Hendricksons, and then you can be home in time to have your cocktail and your supper. So a lot of these early spring hatches are gentlemen's hatches because they're mid afternoon into the evening a little bit. So that's early season. Hopefully that kind of is a good start to talking about them.
Especially after this winter, we've it's I yeah, I still haven't been out. Have you been out?
I really haven't. There's been some windows. I'm not gonna lie, but life's been busy. This late winter's been busy with my job, so I haven't had much opportunity. I have had the opportunity to drive by a lot of streams and see our high flows and our big ice dams cruising down, but there were a couple windows. I haven't really gotten out much. I think the last time I really got out was probably end of November. And I've also been in fly tying mode, so I've been
Right.
just cranking out bugs. But I am definitely getting antsy, and so all those names are exciting. Gray fox,
Yeah.
marsh browns, blue quills, Hendricksons. Those are all your early season mayflies, and we're getting close to that.
Yeah, I went over 18 Mile a couple of different times at a couple of different points today, and it's still moving, but it's a lot clearer than it was last week.
That's cool. There was a
So,
window on the 18 mile too. I did see the perk. One of the perks of my job is I get to drive all over the place. I go from job site to job site, and it'll take me anywhere from, all the way down into the Chautauqua County or Allegheny County, and all the way back up to Hamburg. So I get to see kind of the state of the streams almost every single day because I drive by a piece of water, some kind of stream, whether it's a tributary or an inland stream. So I've been keeping tabs on it, but it's we're almost there. We're about to break through that little hump in the high flows and start to get into that really good time of year where water stays high generally or higher in that early spring, and it can be really good fishing.
yep,
Yeah.
absolutely. So we're talking about the spring.
Yep.
So we're getting into May, and so what do we generally see around here, once summer starts to hit?
So once we get through mid-May into like early June, you definitely start to see sulfurs. And again, tons of different kinds of sulfurs. I'm mainly talking the Invaria, the larger ones. They're real yellow, but there's Rotunda and Dorothea, but sulfurs are yellow. That's the way I look at it, right? So when we start to see those little yellow, creamy colored sulfurs, that's when you're getting into end of May, early June. That's also when a couple of our streams will see green drakes. Again, not real heavy, but enough for the trout to see them. Granted, there have been years where it's been extremely heavy, and I've had the most amazing fishing of my life. But sulfurs are really great. I will say sulfurs carry a bunch of different patterns for sulfurs. If you're going to be out there looking for hatches from like mid-May into early June, even like through the whole month of June in Western New York, the Catskills, they get sulfurs, end of May, and then it just continues all the way into August down there because of their water temps, right? For us, it's mostly you're going to see sulfurs on all of our trout streams. I can't think of a trout stream in Western New York that I haven't seen sulfurs on. So that's a really fun one. That's one you should be ready for. And our streams are not like the Catskills where you have, crazy mobs of anglers flying down to the water and throwing the same fly pattern from the same fly shop over and over. So yeah, you should carry a few different patterns for sulfurs. If we're talking Western New York, you probably don't need to carry all that many. But I'll get into maybe some of that. some of my favorite, profiles or some of my favorite flies for that. But sulfurs are big. The green drakes are exciting. That's end of May, mid June. That can be a lot of fun. That's when you start to get more into the late afternoon and into the evening. Like sulfurs, I've noticed on a lot of our streams are maybe 3, 4 o'clock, and then they kind of start to, really get heavy into that 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock. That's the time of year where we have more daylight too, which is
Right.
cool. You can get out of work at 5 o'clock and
And you still have a few hours.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, you still got hours, and then the green drakes. You'll see, you go down there for the sulfur hatch, and it's 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock at night, and then all of a sudden you're like, wait a minute, what's that giant bug? And so that's when you start to get into that summertime, um, summertime June type bugs, type mayflies, and then that's when you start to get towards like the end of like the peak mayfly stuff. I will say, don't underestimate Cahills in Western New York. I've had some absolutely amazing evenings. No one's on the water. You still have decent flows. Water temps are still under 65, 68 degrees all through the day. So, June, even into early July, Cahills can be really, really good. Again, a hatch that you might hit if you decide you're going to go check out a trout stream after work, 5, 6 o'clock. Um, I've had some really fun nights where I did not expect to see much going on, and there were some really, really good Cahill hatches, like cream colored, 12s, 14s, sometimes into a 16. Hatches, generally those mayflies, they're a little bigger when that hatch pops off, and then towards the end of it, maybe a week later, 4 days later, depending on the mayfly, they start to get a little smaller. But Cahills can be creamy. They can also be like I've seen on the Iwatka. I've seen pink Cahills. They're like pinkish orange colored. Um, yeah, and they're good all the way through like June and July. Again, just watch the water temps, and sometimes we have those years where like last year it was just so low and dry around here. But yeah, if you hit it right, that can be really fun. And then Tricos, which is the really steady one around here, but a little tricky. Small. That's when you're busting out your size 22 Griffiths gnats, or your size 24s, 28s, early morning hatch, which actually is kind of cool because in the summer into August when things are warm and our streams, are warmer, and we're kind of a little more worried about fishing trout streams in the summer, right? Tricos are early morning. So, literally sun comes up 7 o'clock, 6 o'clock. That's when the stream is going to be the coolest throughout the summer. So Tricos can be like a lifesaver for the trout fishermen because it's been hot, it's been dry, but you can go hit that early morning summertime Trico hatch and, give it your all.
Cool. Now, once we get into late June, early July, and the weather starts warming up a little bit, how often do you go out and do, non-trout species? Because I'll be honest with you, in the summertime, the bluegills, smallmouth, largemouth, I've still got, a couple of decent, carp where we camp that, that I've been trying to catch for the last 4 years, but they're smart.
That's carp, man. I totally get into that. To be honest, super, super tricky when you're like a bug crazed trout fisherman. There are other really good things happening out there. So some years, depending on the conditions, I mean, I've set the bug stuff aside. Once we do get into the summer, though, yeah, super great. We have great fisheries around here, and funny enough, they still, non-trout species still fall into that hatch talk, right? I can't remember. I think during the hatch presentation that I did, I mentioned that some of the coolest hatches I've fished have been on ponds.
Oh yeah.
Where, you know what I mean? Where you're like, same thing. You get out of work, you want to go fish the pond down the road for an hour before the sun goes down. Yep. And you're like, wait a minute, what the heck? There's bugs coming off here. And you catch bluegills and bass and all kinds of stuff that are feeding. And
I'll tell you, one of my favorite things to do in the summertime, and it's, I mean, granted, I could probably do it, just as much with with a spinning rod too, but I choose to do it with a fly rod. just a popper on a lake. I
Absolutely.
just it's
Absolutely.
when you're getting 80 degrees and you're it's definitely too hot to be to be trout fishing. That's my jam in the
That's so much
summertime
fun.
though.
Yep, that's so much fun. I mean, that's that like takes me back to, grandpa and I would cruise, we'd hop in the truck and go drive out to whatever, some of these smaller lakes in Western New York where you can pull the car over and cast out there, and you'd be surprised some of the I've caught I've caught like pretty large sized pike, casting a popper into the water from the bank. So, summertime is great for that stuff. And yeah, when things are starting to get hot, don't think that you can't go try and fish with dry flies or find a hatch somewhere that is not trout related. That happens all the time. If you want to go crazy, yeah, go carp fishing. That's tough stuff, right? You got
Yeah.
to catch them. You got to catch them while they're eating. You got to
Yep.
find that feeding carp. You got to get your presentation just right.
Hmm.
Um,
Get it
that's
right in
fun.
front of them because they can't see worth shit.
Yep,
So
yep. That can be really fun though. That's a great way to break that. Trout fishing is not good right now, and if we want it to be good when the conditions are right, you got to go out and find fun in other places. And some of the most fun that I have fishing throughout the year is taking a break from trout.
Yep. Honestly, the most fun that I've had in the past 6 months is like right before the winter. Um, there was I was down at 18 Mile and just the smallmouth.
Oh
Just
yeah,
yep.
oh yeah,
Just
and like early spring
smallmouth on a
too.
woolly bugger. Yep.
Smallmouth when they come into. I mean, that's how I grew up. Like I used to go down and fish the 18 mile. Lived right in the village of Hamburg, and I could ride my bike down South Creek and be down to the 18-mile creek. Not the 18-mile right in the village, but even down the Forks.
Like the
That
county
area.
park.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
county park, the Forks area. I could be there in 15 minutes, especially when I was a young kid. I could get pretty far and fast on my bicycle. So. Uh,
Nice.
yeah, that's good stuff, man. And there's honestly, you see some really cool hatches um, on our actual migratory, tributaries of the lake. I see hexes and all kinds of crazy bugs that hatch out on the lake that make their way up into those tributaries. Again, you're not going to be necessarily fishing for um, rising brown trout or anything like that, but you're going to see some of those really cool hatches if you start to get nerdy with these bugs. That's another fun thing to do is if it's too hot to fish for trout, go explore, find a new spot, go find somewhere where there's nobody around, and you might be surprised. I've caught some big old. I think that one of the hardest fights I've ever had in Western New York on my fly rod was on the 18 mile, and I caught a drum. And I mean
Oh
that
wow.
thing, drum are you don't expect to catch one, and then you do, and it pulls all the line off your reel, and there's a lot to be had. So
Well, definitely not further. I grew up in the city, and you know, that was a that was an everyday catch down at the the foot of ferry.
oh yeah.
But you don't really hear a lot about them, down here.
Yeah, right in the mouth. Right on Old Lakeshore Road, the bridge there. I remember going down there, and I wish I could tell you what fly I was using, but I was definitely stripping some kind of streamer,
Yep.
and I hooked into a fish, and I thought for sure it was a bass. And I mean, all of a sudden, my rod was moving like I hooked a steelhead. That pull, that tap tap, and I was like, wow, this is a really big bass. And sure enough, I get the thing in, and it was an absolute monster drum. And I don't know, maybe just because I was close to the mouth, they come in and search around for stuff. They don't really come real far into the tributaries, but
Right.
um, being right at the mouth of the 18 mile there, it's like a grab bag. It's like the mystery bag where you don't know what you're going to catch. And yeah,
And that estuary back there too is a lot of fun.
super. And that's a good example of we're talking about all these mayflies. If you're going to fish ponds and stuff like that through the summer, pay attention to like the riparian buffer zones and like what's going on around, because even terrestrials, that can be so much fun. Fishing terrestrial patterns is an absolute blast on a pond, on a lake. Um, are you going to catch a million fish by throwing a terrestrial pattern out into a pond? No. But that one fish that comes up and slams that fly is is the whole day in a nutshell. It is so exciting. Oh man, I've thrown that terrestrial, that foam beetle out there 25 times, and on the 26th, a smallmouth came up or a largemouth came up and just blasted it. That can be the day right there.
Oh yeah,
So
absolutely. So what would we find in your fly box? What are your top 10 for these waters?
yeah, let me see what I got here. I tried this morning. I was like, all right, I got to do the Tom Rosenbauer top 10 flies here, right? So I'll say
Oh, he
this.
won't do that.
Yeah, no way. He would never. I will say this. So to preface my list, I will say you got to take a fly pattern and you got to change the colors and the sizes. So take that fly that Tim Flagler ties or whatever that you saw on the internet. Change the color, change the size, change the wings. As someone who's gotten really into fly tying over the last, I'll be honest, I've only really been fly tying for about 4 years. Honestly, halfway decently for maybe a year. So it's one of those things where I finally learned, take a pattern you really love, and if it floats well, if it fishes well, when we're talking mayflies and caddis, don't be afraid to change colors. So that you're going to hear a little bit of that in my top 10 list, but I have to start with the obligatory pheasant tail because if you don't have pheasant tails in your box, you're crazy. If you're fishing lakes, rivers, streams, doesn't matter. I think what we used to teach in the Orvis, back in the Orvis store when we did our 201 classes on the Clarencetown Pond, Adam Schroeder, it was always a setup because he would tie on a pheasant tail literally to the end of a 9-foot leader, just straight onto the end of the leader, and he would cast it out and strip that nymph back to him, let it sink, and just strip it back every time. The first cast, he's going to catch a sunfish, right? But that pheasant tail is so versatile, as we all know, whether you're talking a American pheasant tail or a soft hackle or a beadhead pheasant tail. Whether you're going to put weight on it or not, that pheasant tail is so versatile. So I carry pheasant tails, weighted, non-weighted. I carry like flinth versions of them, or like wet fly style pheasant tail nymphs. Those are really deadly in the summertime on some of the tail waters or cooler waters in the Catskills, or even here in Western New York. You can really toss a non-weighted pheasant tail into the water and just kind of let it sink a little bit, and you'd be surprised. That can be really deadly. So that's definitely number one. You got to have a pheasant tail. And for the purists out there, yes, I'm starting with a nymph on my list. Next would be just like I was kind of describing. My next would be like some kind of a nymph soft tackle hybrid. So it's a nymph pattern. It's a soft tackle as well, kind of a cross between a nymph and a wet fly. A good example of one of those, if you Googled the swing nymph, that is kind of the platform for what I'm talking about. So the swing nymph is it has the body of a standard, nymph that you would tie, even a Perdigon style nymph, but then it has the head of a wet fly. It's either wrapped with partridge around the head of the hook or some kind of hen, a soft hackle. And it's a little bit of a cross between a nymph and a wet fly. So that's number 2 on my list because it can be really versatile. You can put some gel on it. You can float it high to kind of imitate that nymph that's struggling to shed its shuck as the mayfly emerges, or you can sink it deep. So that's number 2. Number 3 is a rusty spinner because that's something there's so much like what we're talking about, Jim, which, as you know, oh my gosh, it's an endless thing.
Oh yeah.
Like if you were like, hey Chuck, I'm going to mute myself and just go crazy and talk about hatches, it's just absolutely a crazy topic. But the rusty spinner is an essential because you're going to want to carry it in a few sizes. You're going to see spinner falls on ponds, lakes, streams, everywhere you go, all spring, all summer, into the fall. And when you have that one fish that's eating something, maybe it's just below the surface or maybe it's right on top and you have no idea what he's eating, cast a rusty spinner. Um, they're not easy to see, but if you have a good cast, it doesn't need to be there very long. If you can get it right where you think that fish is feeding, rusty spinners are like a hatch breaker. You know, um, you don't know what's going on. That's like like I was talking about earlier with the Griffiths gnat during a trico hatch. You you don't want to throw a 28 size trico, but maybe if you throw the 22 Griffiths gnat, well, the rusty spinner's like that. It's I don't know what's going on, but I bet you they'll eat a rusty spinner. So that's a good one to have in your box. Few sizes: 14s, 16s, 18s.
Okay.
The RS2 is, what number would that be? 4. So the RS2 is like a blue wing olive emerger type fly. It's very simple. It is also very small, but it's very simple. It's basically, you either use some rooster hackle or you can use like those mayfly tips for the tails. Very simple, thin tail. An olivey dubbing for the body, and then a little tuft of CDC for the wing. And the RS2 is a great pattern because if you gel that thing up or you get some powder on it, you can float it really high. Maybe not as high as like a hackle, fly, but you can get it up on the top. And if you want to, you can also sink it or swing it, let it sink and fish it like a wet fly. It can be deadly that way. So, maybe I'll try by starting with that RS2. It's so small, I can't see it anyway. So maybe I'll start by gelling it up and floating it and getting a good drift with it. And if they're not eating it, or I see those fish eating just like bubbling below the surface, they're not really breaking, I'll let that thing sink. So you can fish that fly as a dry fly, an emerger, or let that puppy sink a couple inches and swing it out like you would with a wet fly. And you'd be surprised. That can be the ticket. So giving away
Okay.
my secrets, but not my secrets. I learned them somewhere. So like
somebody's secrets.
Yeah, right. And that's what makes this so fun is, getting people's perspective. But that's a good one. RS2 is, you're not going to be able to see it when it's out there. I won't lie to you, but sometimes you don't have to. You just get it in the area where these fish are, and all of a sudden your line goes tight. So the sparkle dun, that would be 5. So, you've got the original sparkle dun, the Craig Matthews, the, Comparadun style, like deer hair wing. I'll be honest, Adam Slavinsky got me really into it because the guy had 1,000 of them in different sizes and colors, and it's so practical. EP sparkle duns are basically that same platform, the way that the sparkle dun was tied by Craig Matthews, but instead of using deer hair, which can be a pain, you're using EP fiber or like a floating yarn. I think Fulling Mill now has it's essentially the same as EP fiber. It's like a floating yarn, a treated floating yarn, but you're using that for the wing and you're using that for the tail, or the, whatever you want to make it look like a shuck. But, look up the EP sparkle dun if you haven't seen it, because that is a perfect example of a fly that you can take that platform. Here's what you use for the tail. Here's what you use for the body. Here's what you use for the wing. And then just change it. Tie that same fly, but just in different sizes with different body colors, with different wing colors. It's the same platform, but you can use that to cover a lot of bases, for your sulfurs, for your Hendricksons. I would say every mayfly, I have an EP sparkle dun for every mayfly in my fly box because it floats so high. So check those out. Those are on my list. They're right smack in the middle.
Awesome. What are we on? We're on 6.
Yeah. So breadline emerger. Check them out. Again, breadline emerger is like you're going to use some kind of Zelon or floating yarn for the tail, which you're going to want it to be kind of big, like fluffy, kind of like a shuck. And then what's cool about the breadline emerger is the wing is it's like a rabbit's foot. It's kind of like Tom Rosenbauer's rabbit's foot emerger, but just like an old school Catskill style dry fly, you do wrap the thorax of the fly with hackle, and then you clip the bottom of the hackle off so that it does sit like an emerger in the surface film. But it has like that half body of hackle. Take a cat picture taking that Catskills fly and cutting the bottom hackle off of it. So it kind of gives that look of some mayfly legs.
Sacrilege.
Yeah, it is sacrilege, but I'll tell you what, extremely deadly, and not a lot of people fish them. If you're gonna take it outside of Western New York, go down to the Catskills. I remember my first trip down there during sulfurs in the summer, and that fly absolutely killed it because I really don't think everybody was using the same sulfur, flies that you buy at the fly shop, but nobody was using it. Was just because it was different. It wasn't because of that fly pattern, right?
Right.
But it was because it was different. And so stuff like
Something that they weren't used to seeing.
Yeah, exactly. You got to have stuff like that in your box. So breadline emerger, again, you can tie that in different sizes, colors. Use it as a platform for your mayflies. I do have to cover some caddis stuff, right? Because caddis, I said earlier, are a pain. And I brushed over them and said, hey, just be ready for them. Well, that's caddis, and they're hard. So I like to carry a CDC and elk. It's basically an elk hair caddis, but instead of having the hackle wrapped around the body and having it float real high, there's no hackle wrapped around the body underneath that elk hair wing. There's just CDC and then elk hair on top. So it does sit more in the surface film and it floats really, really well. And that CDC under the elk wing definitely gives that little bit of like movement when it's on the water, but then you still have that traditional elk wing, which gives that caddis profile. So that's probably my favorite dry fly. It's more of an emerger caddis pattern, but that thing rocks. And again, just be aware, like caddis, use that platform. If you are out in the early spring and you see size 16 caddis and they have a black wing, boom, tie a CDC and elk, but get some black elk hair. Change the body color. I'm like beating that hard here, but that definitely is a great way to cover a wide variety of caddis. Is pick your favorite caddis profile. I like the CDC and elk, and then I just change the colors. The butch caddis I believe it's a Kelly Gallup fly. I guess I'll have to check that out. I want to say I'm like 80% sure that's a Kelly Gallup fly, but it's kind of a caddis. Look up the butch caddis. I use that fly for terrestrials. I think it can look like a hopper. I think it can look like a stone fly. It has rubber legs. So that's why I don't really, it's called the butch caddis, but I don't really, maybe that's why it's called the butch caddis. I don't know. But it's definitely a very loose interpretation of a caddis and a bunch of big terrestrials. So check out the butch caddis. That made my list because in the summer, that's a fly you can use, toss that thing around. Definitely love that fly.
That's pretty cool looking.
Yeah, isn't it? It's got like the little rubber legs and it's small. So it's not like this giant chubby Chernobyl.
Right.
I mean, you could beef it up if you want, but that's a good fly. So
I like that.
Yeah, that's my go-to.
I have to tie a few of those before the season.
Yeah, it's my go-to for like dry dropper fishing too. In the early spring, I'll put a little. Everybody plug your ears. Put a Perdigon underneath that thing, and you are in good shape. So, para ant. So really, that's just a parachute ant. Check those out. Tie them with colored posts. Don't be afraid to use bright fluorescent orange and green, and some people even use black for the post because some evenings where you've got that really weird glare, sometimes you can see the black. But a para ant is really great. Again, a fly pattern you can use on ponds. You can use it on a lake. You can use it on a trout stream. It's that hatch breaker. So that had to make, I'm big on flies like that, prospecting flies, because yeah, you can match every single bug in Couchy and Nastasi's hatch book, but you can also just prospect and have these fly patterns that, if you learn how to fish them right and you get in the right situation, they can really be productive. And then I saved the best for last, Jim.
Okay.
And it's going to be absolute sacrilege as well.
Yeah.
Take a Parachute Adams for the last fly on my top 10, and I want you to ruin the Parachute Adams. I want you to use Zelon for the tail instead of Rooster. I want you to make it modern, like a modern Parachute Adams a good example of what I'm talking about is Tom Baltz, very famous Cumberland Valley angler, Orvis endorsed guide, really great fly tyer. He has his Paranymph. It's basically he's not going to listen to this, so I'm going to say what I'm going to say because he's never going to hear this. But the Paranymph by Tom Baltz is basically a bastardized Parachute Adams, and it's amazing. It's such a good fly. It works like all year round for whatever, because it just like the Parachute Adams, it just has that profile. But
Right.
he uses Zelon for the tail. You know, he uses, I think he uses like a, Parachute Adams traditionally has like that gray, like muskrat or just gray superfine dusting, but he uses like hair, like rabbit, rabbit's mask, but whatever. He's got time to rake the rabbit face. I don't have time for stuff like that. It's super buggy looking. But take a Parachute Adams and change it. Make the post on your Parachute Adams a color you can see. I have caught a 20-inch brown trout on a Parachute Adams type fly with an orange post, and that fish did not care that post was bright orange. So, people got to do stuff like that. I'm 30 years old. I've got pretty good eyesight, but I will take any advantage I can get, even on a size 12 dry fly. I want to see that puppy. So
no, absolutely.
Take your Parachute Adams, ruin the tradition of it, and just make it buggier looking, and that's the top 10 right there.
So when you were at Orvis, did you do any tying for them? I mean,
no. I think they had a couple guys that couple dudes that had been tying for them for years, but most of their flies came from the Orvis catalog. So no, and to be honest, the time that I did work for Orvis, I was super lucky because they brought me in. Adam Slavinsky being my close fishing mentor and friend, he kind of brought me in to just have like the cool fun job, right? And I'm super grateful for that. I had a full-time job while working there, so I would just come in and help teach the classes, and I got to meet a lot of really cool people. That's what I'm most grateful for, is going on some of the Orvis trips and teaching some of the 101s, 201s, 301s, all the people that I got to meet. And but I was working for Orvis just part-time, so
right.
I was just going there and doing all the fun stuff, and super grateful for that.
Nice.
Yeah,
excellent. Oh, I appreciate your time.
Yeah,
I appreciate that list. We did. I know it's kind of a foregone conclusion, it's all over but the shouting and everything, but I'm not gonna really talk about it. But there's gonna be some changes coming up at the end of the month here. I mean, you never know. Somebody might somebody might come with a group and nominate themselves and steal everything away. But it's never happened. But maybe we'll talk about it. We'll talk about it at the end. When I do my closing, as far as, we know that you were one of the newest members of the board of directors.
Yeah.
So, it's nice to have you. It's nice to have you around.
It's been a pleasure. And you guys, we've got a special group of people, the whole club itself, but especially everyone on the board. Everybody cares, and everybody also has their own little niche. I think that it's been really cool. When I was brought into being a board member, it was really cool to see how you guys operate and what everybody does, and then what everybody does together.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really special. I mean, you put a ton of effort into the education stuff and getting kids out on the water, and you put a ton of effort into the media stuff too. Bill now being the advocacy chair.
Yep.
Super cool. Your podcast with Bill was really great. And I do have to say, there are so many groups in Western New York that maybe aren't necessarily anglers, but have the same mindset.
Yeah.
And when you guys in that podcast started talking about like, well, maybe we can start getting some rallies together for, advocacy for some of this crappy legislation and some of these things that they're trying to overturn. It got me fired up. That podcast got me fired up. So
I mean, that's the nice thing about this. I mean, boards change and leadership changes, and people come and go. But I think that we came on at a really, really good time. We've got a group of people. Everybody has their strength, and they're using their talents towards what it is that we do.
Yeah, so we all have the same goal in mind, and that's really cool to just get like-minded people together. And yeah, there's always changes. There's ebbs and flows with things, and I think it's kind of weird. Like, I came in at a time where I don't know, Joe just kind of said, like, hey, somebody's dropping off the board. Do you want to join? And I thought it was a great opportunity, if I said yes, to become more involved. And I've always needed like a kick in the pants with getting involved with TU. Right. And I thought, man, this is my opportunity to, this is that kick in the pants. Like, Joe's offering me this. And yeah, it's been very special to be a part of it. And I think that there's only good stuff to come. So
yeah, I agree. Thanks for listening to Trout Pod, the official podcast of Western New York Trout Unlimited. You can find us on all the major podcast apps, including Apple, Amazon, YouTube, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, and all the rest. Keep in the know on all things WNYTU by visiting our website at wnytroutunlimited.org and signing up for the email list, subscribing to our YouTube channel, and following us on Facebook and Instagram. Contact the podcast directly at podcast@wnytroutunlimited.org. Talk to you again real soon. Thanks for listening.